What if your intelligence is the reason you're alone? Not because you're broken, but because you're seeing something the rest refuse to see. There's a secret no one talks about. The smarter you are, the harder it is to belong. You notice too much. You ask the wrong questions. You feel the room shift when you speak, even if your words are soft. They say you're too intense, too quiet. But what they really mean is, you make them uncomfortable. You look at life and think, why does everything feel fake? Why does no one else seem to notice? And then you wonder, is something wrong with me? But maybe that question isn't a sign of your failure. Maybe it's the first proof that you're awake in a world addicted to dreaming. They call it a flaw, but Schopenhauer called it awareness, a kind of vision that costs you connection but gives you clarity. So ask yourself this: if you weren't meant to fighting, what were you meant to do instead? It starts early. You're sitting in a classroom full of kids the same age, but it feels like you're in a completely different place. Not smarter, not better, just there. While others talk and laugh without thinking, you stared out the window again, stuck on questions that no one else seems to be asking. Why do people say things they don't mean? Why is small talk like noise? Why do you feel like you are seeing life, not living? No one told you that the world would feel this strange. You think connection will come naturally, but that's not the case. So you learn to pretend, to laugh when you have to laugh, to keep your questions hidden like secrets too fragile for the room. People think you're arrogant, but you're just tired of having to explain myself, tired of having to deal with blank stares or nervous smiles. You're not trying to be aloof, you are just profound. And no one knows how to meet you there. And so you start to withdraw into yourself, not out of fear, but from quiet exhaustion. You hide your depth, not because you want to, but because you realize depth makes people uncomfortable. You are not cold, you are just invisible. And that was the beginning of your loneliness. Not the kind of loneliness where you're alone in your room, but the kind that your mind never really meets. So you grow up and learn to fit in. You talk less, you laugh more. You give everyone just enough to feel safe, but never the whole of you. Because every time you share the whole truth about your thoughts, apartment, we honor geniuses in books, in theory, in history. But when real intelligence enters the room, unfiltered, unpolished, offensive, then it is not welcome. It managed. Domestication. Ignored. Because real intelligence isn't just about solving problems. It questions the rules. It peels back the comfortable illusions that everyone agrees to believe. And that makes everyone feel insecure. They become silent. It's not because you're wrong, but because of your truth to reality. You see, society says it values intelligence. It exposes the falsehood where others see tradition. It recognizes contradictions that no one dares to name. It shines a light on the things we are taught to ignore. And the reaction? Delicate, yet sharp. A small distance. A missed invitation. A quiet label. Too much, too intense, too critical. You become someone who thinks too much. The one who ruins the moment, people who cannot let go of everything. But the truth is, you never try to ruin anything. You're trying to understand it. To make it return should be reality. To find something real in a world that sticks so tightly to the script. And so the more alert you are, the more lonely you feel. It's not because people hate you, but because they don't know what to do with someone who sees what they're still trying not to feel. And somewhere along the way, you stop asking to be understood. You stop waiting for the world to meet you where you are. Not out of pride, but because of silent resignation. Because every understanding you speak, every layer you explore, seems to push others further away. You don't want to feel superior. You just want to feel it recognized. But the more clearly you see, the less people stay. Here, Schopenhauer steps in, not to console, but to confirm. He did not romanticize intelligence. He did not paint it as a gift. He called it what it often became, a burden. Schopenhauer believed that the more conscious you are, the more aware you are of the pain created in life itself. Not just the pain of existence, but also the way people run from it, hide from it, distract themselves in order to survive. He called it will, a blind, unrelenting force that drives human behavior. Unreasonable desire, longing without end. Most people pursue it without question. The pursuit of status, approval, pleasure, power. Not because it makes sense, but because they cannot imagine anything else. Smart people, they begin to see patterns. They recognize the illusion. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to separate. Not because you want to escape, but because the game no longer makes sense. And that separation, it does not bring peace. It delivers ostracism. Because when you stop worshiping what others pursue, you will lose your place in the crowd. Not because of rebellion, but because of awakening. Schopenhauer understood this silence, distance, this silent pain. These are people who think too much and belong too little. He didn't say it would get easier. He just said, you are not alone in feeling lonely. And sometimes that truth is the first light in the darkness. So what happens? When do you start to see what others miss? When the game loses its appeal and conversations are like echoes bouncing off hollow walls? You don't hate people. Actually, you care deeply, maybe too profound. But the more time you spend in rooms filled with noise, the more lonely you feel inside. It's not arrogance, but it's the resonance, about longing for something that feels real, not just familiar. In 2016, a study in the British Journal of Psychology discovered something surprising. The more intelligent a person is, the less funny they are with regular social interactions. It's not because they're antisocial, but because their minds don't like chatter. They like depth. Their nervous system not only processes what is said, they also absorb the things left unsaid. Hidden content, strain, contradictions hang in the air. And over time, excessive stimulation, that becomes exhaustion, not physically, but emotionally. They begin to feel a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. They are surrounded, but not seen, included, but not understood, smiling amidst a sea of voices, but quietly hungry for the truth. Psychologists call this cognitive loneliness. It's not just people's absence, but rather the absence of edema connection suitable for your mind. And when that gap is too wide, something inside started to close. You stop reaching out. You begin to look inward. It's not because you've given up on everyone, but because you're tired of having to explain yourself to the wrong people. You crave something more, not more attention. But is authenticity then? And if no one around you speaks the same language as you start to wonder, do I have to walk this path alone? But maybe it's not about isolation, probably about sophistication, about learning to protect your depth in a world that often doesn't know what to do with it. You care, more than they know, more than even you sometimes understand. But the more you care, the more out of place you feel. Because while others are laughing at distractions, you're quietly watching the tension behind their eyes. While conversations dance on the surface, you're already beneath it, feeling the contradictions, the hesitation, the truths left unsaid. It's not that you don't want to connect. You do, desperately. But your mind, it craves something more. Not noise. Not performance. Depth. There was a study published in the British Journal of Psychology that found something quietly tragic. The more intelligent a person is, the less satisfaction they tend to find in everyday social interaction. Not because they're antisocial, not because they think they're better, but because their inner world is wired differently. Their nervous system doesn't just process what's being said, it absorbs everything that isn't between the tension in someone's voice, the mismatch between words and energy, the subtext, the emotion, the avoidance, all of it taken in all at once. And over time, that's not a connection, that's overload. Because what feels casual to most feels overwhelming to you. It's not about being shy, it's about being overstimulated. Not by the lights or the sounds, but by the emotional data that no one else seems to notice. You leave the room feeling like you ran a marathon. Not because anyone attacked you, but because you couldn't stop feeling everything. You were present, fully, maybe too fully. And then you wonder, is something wrong with me? But no, what you're feeling is a symptom of awareness, a cost of clarity. There's a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. You can be surrounded by people, even loved by them, and still feel like no one is really with you. Psychologists call it cognitive loneliness, not the absence of people, but the absence of resonance, the absence of minds that meet yours where it lives. And when that gap gets too wide, something in you begins to retreat. Not out of bitterness, not out of arrogance, but out of quiet exhaustion. You stop trying to explain yourself. You stop trying to translate your soul into a language that only scratches the surface. You don't want more attention. You want authenticity. You don't want to be admired. You want to be understood. And when that isn't available, you begin to look inward, not to hide, but to heal. Because at some point you realize, it's not that you're too much, it's that most people were never taught how to meet you there. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you weren't meant to be easily understood. Maybe your mind isn't a crowd pleaser, but a soul whisperer. And your sensitivity? It's not a weakness, it's a compass, one that always points to the truth, even in a world trying to forget how to feel. This is a deeper wound. A wound does not always bleed where others can see it. Sometimes you walk into a room, speak clearly, profound, with a calm presence, and something changed. It's not about you, but stay surname. You didn't say anything offensive. You don't pretend to be superior, you are just yourself. But suddenly, the mood changed. They become colder. Get rid of it. Defense. Why? Because intelligence, real, unfiltered intelligence, not just telling the truth. It reveals contrast. It reflects back to people all the parts of themselves they don't want to see. Not because you're trying, but because your presence makes the invisible visible. And that's annoying. This is where ego comes in, quietly, instinctively. Not to listen, but for protection. The Dunning-Kruger reaction helps explain this. It's a psychological pattern. Those who know the least often believe they know the most, because they still don't know what they don't know. Ignorance breeds confidence, while awareness creates doubt. So when a really smart person enters this space, someone who sees the big picture, ask questions about the system or calmly defy the norm, illusions that started to fall apart. And people don't say, "Thank you for the example." They said, "Who do you think you are?" They call you arrogant. They call you fierce. They shun you, not because you hurt them, but because you do them confused. This is how denial becomes protection. A shield for the fragile ego, a way to silence the discomfort without facing its origin. And once you understand that, you'll stop taking it personally. You realize that their reactions don't reflect your values. It is a defense against their own invisible wounds. However, that doesn't make it any less painful, but it makes it more clear. And sometimes clarity is the first form of healing. At some point, you stop waiting for the world to understand you. You stop hoping the right crowd will show up. The crowd will eventually understand silence, your questions and depth. And instead, you start looking inward, not because of bitterness, but for clarity. This is where Schopenhauer offers what most people are not ready to hear. Loneliness is not a punishment. That's the return. The world chases distractions. It fills every quiet space with noise, every quiet moment with performance. But loneliness takes all of that away. There is no audience, no approval. There's just you and what is true. The crowd gives you entertainment, but loneliness gets to you. In that silence, you start hearing your own voice again. Not the voice you create to fit in, but the voice you buried to survive. You start thinking your own thoughts. Don't just repeat the thoughts you already have. You stop asking, what do they want me to become, and started asking, me, who is it when no one is looking? And gradually the confirmation faded. The need for explanation fades. Performance also faded. The mask fell. And instead, a kind of silent strength. Noiseless, not flashy, but reality. Schopenhauer believes that this is the gift hidden within pain. That loneliness that you once feared can become the foundation on which your true nature learns to stand. Not lonely, but complete. Not separate, but free. So let them misunderstand you. Let them call it silent when it is present, intensity when speaking clarity. Too often it is simply the truth. You never intended to blend in with the noise. You are supposed to listen below it, to realize what others rush past, to feel what they have forgotten how to feel. Yes, it's lonely here, on the edge of everything, but it's also real, and it's rare. You don't have to obscure yourself to be welcoming. You don't need to exchange depth to belong. You are not made for shallow waters. You are here to see, to ask questions, to awaken. And though the road may be silent, even though the world may not go with you, you are not going in vain, because every time you choose to stay right instead of safety, you light a small flame in a world afraid of its own darkness. So no, you are not so much. You are exactly enough for a world that is still learning. How do you feel? If this video means something to you, please subscribe, like, and comment below to let us know you are with us. Let's build a space where deep souls and honest hearts are finally seen.